When the galaxy's most advanced civilizations face extinction, they discover that salvation doesn't come from their sophisticated technology or ancient wisdom. It comes from the one species everyone dismissed as primitive warmongers, humans. In the darkest hour, when hope dies and stars grow cold, a single human warship emerges from the void to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes carry the greatest strength. What happens when beings who have mastered faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, and genetic perfection realize they need the help of creatures who still use kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion? What happens when the barbarians become the saviors? This is the story of the day the galaxy learned that humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology. It's the refusal to give up when everything seems lost. Commander HFY felt the vibration of another hull breach echo through the deck plates beneath her four-armed frame. The bridge of the Eternal Harmony, flagship of the Galactic Coalition's Third Fleet, flickered between emergency lighting and complete darkness as power systems failed one by one. Around her, the finest minds from 12 different species worked frantically at damage control stations, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of desperation. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Lieutenant Tala, her crystalline features reflecting the red warning lights that bathed the bridge. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely. HFY's primary eyes focused on the tactical display, while her secondary pair monitored the damage reports scrolling across her command console. 3 days ago, they had been a proud fleet of 47 vessels representing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Now, only 12 ships remained functional, and even those were operating far below optimal capacity. The enemy had appeared without warning, emerging from what the Coalition's best scientists had assured everyone was empty space. These creatures called themselves the Devourers, and their name proved horribly accurate. They consumed everything. Energy, matter, even the fabric of space-time itself seemed to bend to their hunger. Their ships, if they could be called ships, looked like living nightmares made of shadow and teeth, absorbing weapons' fire and growing stronger with each attack. Communication from the science vessel Luminous Truth, announced Operative Kesh, his 6 tentacles dancing across the communication array with practiced precision. They report complete failure of their quantum displacement engines. They're adrift. HFY closed all 4 eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. The Luminous Truth carried the Coalition's most brilliant researchers, beings whose intellects had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation. If they were lost, countless worlds would lose their best hope of finding a solution to the Devourer threat. "Signal the remaining escort vessels," she ordered, her voice carrying across the bridge with the authority that had made her the youngest fleet commander in Coalition history. "Form a protective screen around the Luminous Truth. We'll hold this position until they can restore engine power." "Commander," interjected Science Officer Veltar, his insectoid features twitching with barely controlled panic. "Our own engines are operating at 30% capacity. If the Devourers launch another assault, we won't be able to retreat to a safe distance." The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts, dozens of dark shapes emerging from the void like predators stalking wounded prey. The Devourers had found them again, just as they had found every Coalition fleet that had tried to stand against them. HFY watched the enemy formations spread out in a classic encirclement pattern, their movements coordinated with an intelligence that made her secondary arms tremble. "All vessels, this is Eternal Harmony Actual," she broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Prepare for defensive action. Protect the civilian evacuation ships at all costs." The first wave of Devourer attackers swept toward the Coalition formation like a tide of living darkness. Their weapons defied every principle of physics the Coalition understood, beams of pure entropy that aged metal into dust in seconds, gravity wells that crushed ships into singularities, and, worst of all, some kind of energy drain that left electronic systems dead and crews gasping for air as their life support systems failed. The Coalition ships returned fire with everything they had. Particle beams capable of cracking small moons struck Devourer vessels and simply vanished into their hulls without effect. Quantum torpedoes that could devastate entire fleets exploded harmlessly against enemy shields that seemed to feed on the very energy meant to destroy them. Plasma cannons that had brought peace to 100 worlds for 3 centuries proved utterly useless against an enemy that consumed plasma like food. Direct hit on the escort vessel Quicksilver, reported Kala, her crystal form dimming with sorrow. No response to communications. They're gone, Commander. Ziwaxthara watched helplessly as another coalition ship simply ceased to exist, consumed so completely by the Devourers that not even debris remained. The Quicksilver had carried 800 souls from the aquatic world of Tidalmar, beings who had contributed their species' mastery of fluid dynamics to the coalition's defensive efforts. Their loss diminished not just the fleet's fighting strength, but the very diversity that made the coalition strong. Engine status? She demanded, forcing herself to focus on what she could control rather than what she had already lost. Quantum cores are destabilizing, reported Chief Engineer Mordax from somewhere deep in the ship's belly, his voice crackling through damaged communication systems. We're bleeding exotic matter from 17 different breach points. Even if we manage repairs, we're looking at 6% engine capacity, maximum. The bridge shook again as another Devourer energy beam grazed their shields. The protective barriers that had once seemed invincible now fluctuated wildly, their familiar blue glow fading to a sickly yellow that spoke of imminent failure. Around the fleet, the remaining coalition vessels fought with the desperation of the doomed, their crews performing miracles of engineering and tactics that would have been celebrated throughout the galaxy under different circumstances. "Commander," called out Navigator Plix, his small reptilian form hunched over the stellar cartography station. "I'm detecting massive space-time distortions throughout this entire sector. The Devourers aren't just attacking us. They're feeding on the fundamental structure of reality itself." Ziwaxthara felt her blood turn cold at the implications. The Coalition had theorized that the Devourers were some kind of extra-dimensional threat, but if they were actually consuming space-time, it meant they could potentially unravel the very fabric of the universe. Every second they remained active, they grew stronger while reality itself grew weaker. "Signal all remaining vessels," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Begin emergency data transmission to Coalition Command. Everything we've learned about the enemy, all tactical observations, full sensor records. If we don't survive this, at least our sacrifice might help others prepare." As if responding to her words, the Devourer fleet suddenly shifted formation, their dark shapes moving with predatory grace toward the Coalition's defensive line. Ziwaxthara could feel their hunger through the sensors, a cold emptiness that seemed to drain the warmth from the bridge itself. These weren't just enemy ships. They were manifestations of the void between stars, given form and purpose and an insatiable need to consume everything that dared to exist. "Incoming transmission," announced Kesh, his tentacles moving frantically across his controls. "It's from the evacuation convoy. They're requesting permission to break radio silence." "Put them through," Ziwaxthara said, dreading what she might hear. The voice that emerged from the speakers belonged to Captain Yulhaven of the refugee transport Gentle Harbor, her tone carefully controlled but unable to hide the fear beneath. "Eternal Harmony, this is Yulhaven. We have 40,000 civilians aboard 6 transport vessels, including children from 17 different species. Our defensive capabilities are essentially non-existent. If your fleet can't hold them off." She didn't need to finish the sentence. 40,000 innocent lives hung in the balance, beings who had done nothing more than exist in the wrong place when the Devourers emerged from whatever dark realm had spawned them. Families, children, artists, philosophers, farmers, teachers, the very essence of what the Coalition fought to protect. "We'll hold the line, Captain," Ziwaxthara replied, hoping her voice carried more confidence than she felt. "Continue your evacuation course toward the inner systems. Do not deviate for any reason." As she closed the communication channel, the tactical display updated with new contact information that made her heart skip a beat. The Devourer force was larger than they had initially detected, much larger. What they had thought was a single attack fleet was actually just the advance guard of something that defied comprehension. Behind the immediate threat, sensors detected a mass of enemy vessels that stretched beyond the edge of the star system, a swarm of darkness that could consume entire worlds without slowing down. "Science officer, what's our best estimate of enemy numbers?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Veltar's compound eyes reflected the tactical display as he processed the incoming data. "Computer analysis suggests approximately 50,000 individual Devourer vessels in this sector alone, Commander. Long-range sensors indicate similar formations throughout the Outer Rim territories. This isn't just an attack, it's a full-scale invasion." The magnitude of the threat settled over the bridge like a heavy blanket. 50,000 ships in just this one sector, with similar forces throughout Coalition space. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. The entire Coalition fleet, every vessel from every member species, numbered barely 30,000 ships. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that seemed immune to every weapon in their arsenal. "Commander," Kala called out, her crystal form brightening with what might have been hope. "I'm detecting some kind of anomaly on the edge of the system. It's not a Devourer's signature." ZYXThara's attention snapped to the sensor station as new data flooded the screens. Something was indeed emerging from the darkness at the system's edge, but the energy signature was unlike anything in the Coalition's databases. It wasn't the cold emptiness of the Devourers, nor did it match any known Coalition vessel design. Whatever was approaching moved with purpose through space, its trajectory aimed directly toward the battle zone. "Can you identify the source?" she asked, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. Perhaps another Coalition fleet had received their distress signals and was rushing to their aid. "Negative, Commander," Kala replied, her crystalline features dimming with confusion. "The energy signatures are completely unknown. The propulsion system appears to be some kind of chemical rocket technology, which is impossible at these distances. No civilization has used such primitive technology for faster-than-light travel in over 10,000 years." The tactical display updated again, showing the approaching contact more clearly. It was indeed a single vessel, much smaller than any Coalition ship of the line, but moving with surprising speed toward the battle zone. Its hull appeared to be constructed of metal alloys rather than the advanced composites used by modern civilizations, and its weapon signatures were unlike anything in their databases. "Are you certain about the propulsion readings?" ZYXThara asked, unable to believe what the sensors were telling her. "Confirmed, Commander," Veltar added from his science station. "Chemical combustion for maneuvering thrusters, some kind of controlled nuclear reaction for main propulsion, and what appears to be an experimental faster-than-light drive that operates on principles our computers don't recognize. It's almost like someone built a starship using technology from the pre-space age." As they watched, the unknown vessel continued its approach, apparently oblivious to the massive Devourer fleet that stood between it and the Coalition formation. Either its crew was completely insane, or they possessed some knowledge about the enemy that the Coalition's best minds had missed entirely. "Attempt to establish communication," ZYXThara ordered. "Warn them about the enemy presence and advise immediate withdrawal. We can't protect another vessel in our current condition." Kesh's tentacles danced across his communication array, sending standard greeting protocols on multiple frequencies. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the speakers crackled to life with a voice that carried an accent unlike any in the Coalition databases. "Coalition vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chun aboard the human warship Indomitable. We received your distress beacon and are responding to provide assistance. Please maintain your current position and prepare for combat support." The bridge fell silent as the implications of the message sank in. Humans, the species the Coalition had encountered only 50 years ago, the ones still using projectile weapons and chemical propulsion for most of their technology. The same beings who had been politely declined for Coalition membership because their civilization was deemed too primitive for modern galactic society. "Human warship," ZYXThara replied, her voice carefully diplomatic despite their desperate situation. "We appreciate your response, but you should be aware that we are facing an enemy force of approximately 50,000 vessels. Your single ship, while courageously offered, cannot significantly alter the tactical situation. Please withdraw to a safe distance and carry word of our position to Coalition Command. The response came back immediately, carrying what sounded almost like amusement. Acknowledged, Coalition Vessel. We appreciate the warning, but we didn't travel 6 months through hyperspace just to turn around at the first sign of trouble. Indomitable is engaging the enemy. All Coalition ships, please stand clear of our firing solution. Before HFY could respond, the human vessel accelerated past the Coalition formation with a speed that defied their primitive propulsion readings. As it approached the leading edge of the Devourer fleet, weapon ports opened along its hull, revealing an arsenal that made her question everything the Coalition thought they knew about human technology. The first salvo from the Indomitable struck the nearest Devourer vessel like the fist of an angry god, and something unprecedented happened. The enemy ship exploded into fragments that scattered across space like burning stars. For the first time since the invasion began, a Devourer vessel had been completely destroyed rather than simply consuming the attack and growing stronger. "How is that possible?" whispered Veltar, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. As if in answer to his question, the human warship continued its attack run, weapons firing with mechanical precision at targets throughout the Devourer formation. Each shot found its mark, and each mark resulted in complete enemy destruction. The impossible was happening before their eyes. A single ship, using technology the Coalition considered obsolete, was systematically dismantling a force that had proven invincible against their most advanced weapons. "All stations, continue recording everything," HFY ordered, her voice filled with wonder. "Whatever the humans are doing, we need to understand it. This could change everything." The tide of battle was shifting, and hope, that most dangerous and precious of emotions, began to stir in the hearts of the Coalition survivors as they watched their unlikely saviors work miracles in the darkness between the stars. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she watched the tactical display update with enemy positions. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and months of preparation for this exact moment. They had known this day would come eventually, when humanity would have to prove itself to a galaxy that had written them off as primitive warmongers. "Weapons status, Commander Hayes?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her the youngest captain in Earth Defense Force history. Commander David Hayes, her weapons officer and oldest friend, looked up from his console with a grim smile. "All railgun batteries charged and ready, Captain. Missile tubes loaded with Mark 7 kinetic penetrators. Point defense systems are online and tracking multiple targets." Sarah nodded, studying the enemy formation that stretched across the darkness ahead of them. The Coalition had provided extensive intelligence about these Devourers during humanity's first contact 50 years ago, though they had dismissed human offers of military assistance as well-intentioned but pointless. After all, what could a species that still used kinetic weapons contribute against an enemy that fed on energy? Today, they were about to find out. "Science Officer Martinez, confirm our readings on enemy vessel composition," she ordered. Lieutenant Elena Martinez, the team's xenobiology specialist, consulted her instruments before responding. "Confirmed, Captain. The Devourer ships appear to be composed primarily of exotic matter held together by controlled gravitational fields. They're essentially living black holes with intelligence and malicious intent. Conventional energy weapons only feed them, making them stronger. But they're still made of matter," Sarah mused, a predatory smile crossing her face. "And matter has mass. Mass has inertia. And inertia can be overcome with sufficient kinetic energy." She keyed her communication system to broadcast on the Coalition frequency they had been monitoring for the past 3 days as they approached this system. "Coalition vessels, this is Captain Chun. You're about to witness something that your computers will probably tell you is impossible. I recommend you record everything for later analysis." The response came immediately from the Coalition flagship, the commander's voice carrying a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Captain Chun, our science officers calculate that kinetic weapons will be ineffective against enemy defenses. Their gravitational manipulation can deflect any projectile." "Respectfully, Commander," Sarah replied. Your science officers have never seen what happens when you accelerate a depleted uranium slug to 15% of light speed using magnetic fields powered by a matter-antimatter reactor. Target acquired, beginning attack run. The Indomitable surged forward, its experimental fusion drive pushing the ship to velocities that stressed even its reinforced hull. Sarah had personally overseen the construction of this vessel, incorporating technologies that the Coalition would probably consider both primitive and impossible. Where advanced civilizations had abandoned kinetic weapons in favor of energy-based systems, humanity had perfected them to a degree that bordered on the ridiculous. Firing solution locked, Hayes reported. Target is the lead Devourer vessel, range 12,000 kilometers, and closing. Fire, Sarah ordered. The first railgun spoke with a voice like thunder, launching a projectile the size of a telephone pole at velocities that made mockery of conventional physics. The slug, composed of depleted uranium wrapped around a core of compressed exotic matter, streaked across space faster than most civilizations' computers could track. The Devourer vessel, confident in its ability to absorb any attack, made no effort to evade. Its gravitational defenses, designed to deflect energy weapons and bend spacetime to its will, activated automatically as sensors detected the incoming projectile. For a moment, the slug's trajectory curved as the creature's gravity well attempted to pull it off course. Then, the kinetic penetrator struck, and physics asserted its dominance. The impact released more energy than most star systems produced in a year, concentrated into a point smaller than a pinhead. The Devourer's exotic matter hull, which had proven immune to particle beams and plasma cannons, simply ceased to exist as the projectile punched through it like paper. The creature's internal structures, evolved to process and metabolize energy, had no defense against raw kinetic force delivered with surgical precision. The explosion that followed painted space with fragments of crystallized darkness, the first time anyone had seen a Devourer vessel completely destroyed rather than simply damaged. On the Coalition ships, alarms sounded as sensors detected energy signatures that didn't match any known physics models. Target destroyed, Hayes reported with professional satisfaction. Cycling to next target. How? Came the voice of the Coalition science officer over the open channel. Our calculations show that projectile should have been deflected by the gravity well. Sarah smiled, remembering the years of research that had led to this moment. Your calculations assume we're using conventional kinetic weapons, science officer. This projectile contained a compressed exotic matter core that generated its own gravitational field, essentially creating a miniature black hole at the moment of impact. The enemy's gravity well didn't deflect it. It actually helped focus the energy release. The second railgun fired, then the third and fourth in rapid succession. Each shot found its target with mechanical precision, and each impact resulted in the complete annihilation of a Devourer vessel. The enemy formation, which had seemed so confident moments before, began to shift and adapt as their collective intelligence recognized a genuine threat for the first time. Enemy vessels are altering course, reported Navigation Officer Kim Park from her station. They're attempting to establish a defensive formation. Too little, too late, Sarah replied, watching as her weapons officer targeted the next wave of enemies. Devourers are used to fighting civilizations that rely on energy weapons and shields. They've never faced an enemy that simply punches holes in them with raw kinetic force. The human warship continued its attack run, weaving between Devourer vessels with an agility that surprised even its own crew. Where Coalition ships relied on sophisticated computer systems and automated responses, the Indomitable used human reflexes and intuition, its crew making split-second decisions that no computer could anticipate. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Martinez from her science station, "I'm detecting some kind of communication burst from the enemy vessels. They appear to be coordinating a response to our attack pattern." "Let them coordinate," Sarah replied grimly. "Hayes, switch to missile spread pattern. Let's show them what happens when you bring 50 ships against one that refuses to play by the rules they're used to." The missile tubes opened with mechanical precision, launching a salvo of kinetic penetrators that would have been considered overkill against any conventional target. Each missile carried a warhead designed not to explode, but to deliver maximum kinetic energy transfer upon impact. They were essentially bullets the size of small spacecraft, guided by human intelligence and powered by technology that the galaxy had forgotten. The Devourer fleet responded with their own weapons, beams of pure entropy that aged metal to dust, and gravity wells that could crush starships like tin cans. But the human missiles were too small, too fast, and too unpredictably piloted to be easily targeted. They weaved through the enemy fire like living things, each one guided by an artificial intelligence that had learned to think like a human rather than a computer. Multiple impacts confirmed, Hayes reported as the first wave of missiles found their targets. 17 enemy vessels destroyed, for heavily damaged. Sarah watched the tactical display update with growing satisfaction. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed invincible just minutes before, was now in full retreat as its vessels fell to weapons they had no defense against. The creatures that fed on energy and grew stronger from conventional attacks were learning that there was nothing conventional about human military technology. Coalition vessels, she broadcast. This is Captain Chun. The immediate threat to your position has been neutralized. However, our long-range sensors indicate massive enemy reinforcements approaching this system. I recommend immediate evacuation of all civilian vessels. The response from the Coalition flagship came immediately, the commander's voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Captain Chun, what you've accomplished here defies every law of physics in our databases. How is it possible that kinetic weapons are effective when our most advanced energy systems failed completely? Simple physics, Commander, Sarah replied. Her attention still focused on the tactical display, where more Devourer contacts were appearing at the edge of sensor range. Your civilizations abandoned kinetic weapons because you found energy systems more efficient and versatile. But efficiency isn't everything in combat. Sometimes you need something that just hits really, really hard. Lieutenant Martinez looked up from her station with new sensor data. Captain, the approaching reinforcement fleet is massive. I'm counting over 100,000 individual contacts, all displaying Devourer energy signatures. ETA to our position is approximately 6 hours. Sarah felt the familiar calm settle over her as she processed the tactical situation. 100,000 enemy vessels was indeed a significant threat, but the Indomitable hadn't traveled 6 months through hyperspace just to retreat at the first sign of challenging odds. Humanity had been preparing for this war since their first contact with the Coalition, when they learned about the Devourer threat that advanced civilizations seemed powerless to stop. Communications, signal Earth Command, she ordered. Transmit the following message. Package delivered successfully. Enemy as described in intelligence reports. Kinetic weapons highly effective. Request immediate deployment of Task Force Alpha. Include all tactical data from this engagement. Message transmitted, Captain, replied Communications Officer Rebecca Santos. Earth Command acknowledges receipt and reports Task Force Alpha is standing by for jump coordinates. Sarah turned to address the Coalition frequency again. Commander ZYX-Thera, this is Captain Chun. We're going to hold position until the evacuation convoy clears the system. I strongly recommend that all Coalition military vessels join the evacuation. The reinforcement fleet approaching this position is beyond our current capability to engage. Captain, came the reply. We cannot abandon you to face such overwhelming odds alone. Despite our damaged condition, we can provide support. With respect, Commander, your weapons are ineffective against the enemy, and your ships are too damaged for extended combat. The best way you can help is to survive this engagement and get word back to Coalition Command about what you've witnessed here. Humanity is prepared to handle the situation. As if to emphasize her point, another wave of human missiles struck the remaining Devourer vessels in the immediate area, each impact resulting in complete enemy destruction. The few surviving enemy ships began to retreat toward their approaching reinforcements, their collective intelligence apparently recognizing that they faced an entirely new type of threat. Captain, Hayes reported from the weapons station. Ammunition stores are at 70%. All systems operational, but the approaching enemy fleet is significantly larger than our current magazine capacity. Understood, Sarah replied. That's why we brought friends. She activated the ship's long-range communication array, broadcasting on a frequency that the Coalition couldn't monitor. Task Force Alpha, this is Indomitable. You are cleared for emergency jump to these coordinates. The party has started without you. Space around the human warship began to ripple as reality bent to accommodate incoming vessels. But these weren't the gentle spatial distortions of Coalition jump technology. These were the violent tears in space-time that marked humanity's unique approach to faster-than-light travel. Where other civilizations opened doorways, humans simply broke down the walls. The first ship to emerge was the battlecruiser Defiant, followed immediately by the destroyers Relentless and Unstoppable. Within minutes, a full human battle fleet materialized around the Indomitable, each vessel bristling with weapons that the galaxy had forgotten and technologies that civilized species considered too primitive to be effective. Coalition vessels, Sarah broadcast, meet Task Force Alpha. We're here to demonstrate that sometimes the best solution to a complex problem is the simplest one. Hit it really hard until it stops moving. As the massive Devourer reinforcement fleet approached the edge of the star system, it found itself facing not a single human warship, but an entire battle group of vessels crewed by beings who had never learned that certain things were impossible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either save the galaxy or teach humanity that there were some enemies too powerful to defeat with determination and superior firepower. Commander Zyaxthara watched from her damaged bridge as the human fleet deployed into what appeared to be a chaotic formation, but somehow felt perfectly coordinated. These beings, dismissed by the Coalition as too primitive for membership, were about to face the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known with weapons that most civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. The irony was not lost on her that their salvation might come from the very species they had politely declined to help them. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the command center of the human dreadnought Unstoppable, watching tactical displays that showed the true scope of the approaching Devourer fleet. At 62 years old, he had spent most of his military career preparing for this exact moment. The day when humanity would have to prove that their approach to warfare could succeed, where the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had failed. Fleet status report, he ordered, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect from beings across a dozen star systems. Captain Rebecca Torres, his chief of staff, consulted her data pad with military precision. All vessels report ready for combat operations, Admiral. Task Force Alpha consists of 1 dreadnought, 3 battlecruisers, 8 destroyers, and 16 frigates. Total complement, 14,000 personnel, all volunteers who understand the risks. Kane nodded, studying the sensor displays that showed the Devourer reinforcement fleet spreading across space like a cancer. 120,000 enemy vessels, each one capable of consuming energy weapons and growing stronger from the attack. By any reasonable tactical analysis, the human fleet was outnumbered 4,000 to 1. Any word from the Coalition evacuation convoy? He asked. Transport vessels are clear of the immediate combat zone, reported Communications Officer James Wright from his station. The damaged Coalition warships are maintaining formation with our fleet, despite orders to evacuate. Commander Zyaxthara insists on observing the engagement. Kane allowed himself a slight smile. He could respect that kind of courage, even if it was tactically unsound. The Coalition had been fighting the Devourers for 3 years without achieving a single decisive victory. Their weapons fed the enemy, their shields were useless against entropy beams, and their faster-than-light capabilities couldn't outrun creatures that could bend space-time to their will. Humanity had studied every battle report, analyzed every tactical failure, and reached a conclusion that had shocked the scientific community on Earth. The Coalition was fighting the wrong war entirely. Science Officer Chun. Kane called to the young woman at the xenobiology station. Confirm our analysis of enemy vessel construction. Lieutenant Commander Susan Chun, no relation to Captain Sarah Chun despite the name, looked up from her instruments with the excitement of a researcher whose theories were about to be proven correct. Confirmed, Admiral. Devourer vessels are essentially weaponized black holes, held in stable configuration by exotic matter and guided by distributed intelligence. They're designed to absorb energy attacks and convert that energy into increased mass and structural integrity. But They still obey the fundamental laws of physics, Kane mused, remembering the heated debates in Earth's military academies about how to fight an enemy that seemed to violate basic scientific principles. Exactly, sir. Chun continued enthusiastically. They can absorb energy, but they can't violate conservation of momentum. A sufficient kinetic impact will disrupt their internal structure regardless of how much energy they've consumed. It's like hitting a soap bubble with a hammer. The energy absorption capability becomes irrelevant. Kane studied the tactical display as the Devourer fleet continued its approach. Their formation was perfect by conventional standards, designed to maximize the collective energy absorption of the entire fleet while protecting command vessels in the center. It was a formation that had proven unstoppable against every coalition force that had faced it. Captain Torres, he said, signal the fleet. Prepare to demonstrate why humanity never abandoned kinetic weapons when everyone else did. Throughout the human fleet, crews prepared for battle with the calm efficiency that came from years of training and absolute confidence in their equipment. On the battlecruiser Defiant, weapons crews loaded rail guns with projectiles that contained compressed matter cores designed to penetrate exotic armor. Aboard the destroyer Relentless, missile technicians armed warheads with kinetic penetrators that could punch through the heart of a small moon. The human approach to warfare had evolved along a different path than the rest of the galaxy. Where other civilizations had embraced energy weapons for their efficiency and versatility, humanity had perfected kinetic systems to a degree that bordered on the absurd. A human railgun could accelerate a projectile to significant fractions of light speed using magnetic fields powered by controlled fusion reactions. Their missiles were essentially guided bullets the size of small buildings, each one carrying enough kinetic energy to level a city. Admiral, reported the sensor officer, enemy fleet has entered extreme weapons range. They're maintaining their standard formation. Kane studied the approaching Devourer vessels with the eye of a predator evaluating prey. The enemy's confidence was understandable. Their formation had never failed against coalition forces. But the coalition had never fought using weapons that the Devourers couldn't absorb and redirect. All vessels, this is Admiral Kane, he broadcast to the human fleet. Today we prove that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Target designation Alpha through Zulu, spread pattern 7. Maximum kinetic impact, minimum energy signature. Show them why humanity mastered warfare before we ever left our home system. The first salvo from Task Force Alpha lit space with the brief flares of railgun discharges and missile launches. Unlike the brilliant energy beams that characterize coalition weapons, human armaments produced only brief flashes as magnetic fields accelerated projectiles to impossible velocities. To observers from energy-based civilizations, it looked almost primitive, like watching someone fight with sticks and stones. The Devourer fleet, confident in their energy absorption capabilities, made no attempt to evade the incoming projectiles. Their defensive systems, designed to metabolize particle beams and plasma bursts, activated automatically as sensors detected the human weapons approaching. Then, the first kinetic penetrators struck, and the Devourer fleet learned why humanity had never seen the need to abandon kinetic weapons. The lead enemy vessel, a massive creature the size of a small asteroid, absorbed the first railgun slug's kinetic energy for approximately 1 nanosecond before its exotic matter structure simply ceased to exist. The projectile, traveling at 15% of light speed, punched through the creature's hull like it was made of tissue paper rather than controlled dark matter. The explosion that followed violated several laws of physics that the Coalition considered fundamental. The Devourer's internal energy stores, meant to power its absorption capabilities, were released all at once as the creature's structural integrity collapsed. The resulting detonation created a brief star in the darkness, visible to observers on planets dozens of light years away. Direct hit on Target Alpha, reported the weapons officer with professional satisfaction. Target destroyed. No debris larger than molecular level detected. Kane watched as similar explosions erupted throughout the Devourer formation. Human weapons, dismissed by the galaxy as primitive throwbacks to less civilized times, were systematically annihilating an enemy fleet that had proven invincible against the Coalition's most advanced technology. Enemy formation is breaking apart, reported the tactical officer. They're attempting to implement evasive maneuvers, but their vessels aren't designed for high-acceleration combat. That was the second advantage of humanity's approach to warfare. While other civilizations had optimized their ships for energy efficiency and long-range exploration, human vessels were built for one purpose: delivering maximum firepower in minimum time. Every system aboard a human warship was designed to support that goal, from the oversized fusion reactors that powered the railguns to the reinforced hulls that could withstand the acceleration forces of combat maneuvering. "Signal the fleet," Kane ordered. "Implement pursuit pattern Delta. Don't let them regroup." The human vessels surged forward with an acceleration that would have been impossible for coalition ships. Where other civilizations used gentle gravitational manipulation to move through space, human ships relied on brute force rocket propulsion that could reach significant fractions of light speed in minutes rather than hours. As the chase began, Kane opened a communication channel to the coalition flagship. "Commander ZYX-Thara, this is Admiral Kane. Are you recording this engagement?" Every sensor reading, every tactical maneuver, came the immediate reply. "Admiral, what we're witnessing contradicts everything our science tells us about modern warfare. How is it possible that primitive kinetic weapons are more effective than our most advanced energy systems?" Kane considered his answer carefully. The truth was that humanity had reached the same technological level as the Coalition centuries ago, but had chosen a different path of development. Where other species had abandoned kinetic weapons in favor of energy systems, humans had perfected both approaches and discovered that kinetic weapons had advantages that energy-based civilizations had forgotten. "Commander," he replied, "your civilizations assume that more advanced automatically means more effective. But sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. You can't absorb momentum the same way you absorb energy. Physics is physics, regardless of how sophisticated your technology becomes." On the tactical display, human missiles were systematically hunting down fleeing Devourer vessels. Each impact resulted in complete enemy destruction as kinetic energy overwhelmed exotic matter containment systems. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable against coalition forces were being eliminated with mechanical precision by weapons that most civilizations considered obsolete. "Admiral," reported Captain Torres, "our long-range sensors are detecting additional Devourer fleets moving toward this position. It appears the enemy is committing significant resources to this engagement." Kane studied the new sensor data with interest rather than concern. 3 more Devourer fleets were converging on their position, each one comparable in size to the force they were currently engaged with. By conventional military thinking, the human fleet should begin withdrawal procedures immediately. "Signal Earth Command," Kane ordered. "Transmit the following. Kinetic weapon effectiveness confirmed. Request immediate deployment of Task Force Beta and all available reserve units. Include complete tactical analysis of this engagement." Within minutes, space around the human fleet began to ripple again as more vessels emerged from hyperspace. But this time, it wasn't just another battle group. It was the entire human war fleet that Earth had been building in secret for the past 50 years. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities materialized alongside battleships bristling with rail guns and missile batteries. Carrier vessels emerged loaded with fighter craft designed for one purpose: delivering kinetic warheads with surgical precision. Support ships appeared carrying ammunition stores that could sustain a prolonged campaign against any enemy. "Coalition Command," Kane broadcast on frequencies that every advanced civilization would be monitoring. "This is Admiral Marcus Kane of the Human Defense Force. We are declaring this system under human protection. All Devourer forces in this region are designated as hostile targets and will be engaged with extreme prejudice." As the massive human fleet deployed into battle formation, Kane reflected on the irony of the situation. The Coalition had politely declined humanity's application for membership 50 years ago, explaining that their technology was too primitive and their approach to conflict resolution too violent for civilized galactic society. Today, that same primitive technology and violent approach was the only thing standing between the galaxy and complete annihilation by an enemy that fed on the very sophistication that advanced civilizations prided themselves on. The Devourer reinforcement fleets were approaching rapidly, their collective intelligence apparently recognizing that humanity represented a genuine threat to their expansion across the galaxy. But they were about to discover that humans had one more advantage that the Coalition had never fully understood. They absolutely refused to give up, regardless of how impossible the odds might seem. Kane smiled as he watched his fleet prepare for the largest space battle in galactic history. Win or lose, the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had never learned to fear the dark. Commander Xaxthara watched from the bridge of the Eternal Harmony as space around them filled with human warships of every class and configuration. What had started as a single vessel responding to their distress call had become the largest military fleet she had ever witnessed. The tactical displays showed over 3,000 human ships arranged in formations that seemed chaotic but somehow felt perfectly coordinated. "I count 37 dreadnoughts," reported Lieutenant Kala, her crystalline form flickering with amazement. "Each one larger than our biggest battleships. How did they build such a fleet without any of our civilizations detecting it?" Science Officer Veltar looked up from his station, compound eyes reflecting the tactical display data. "Commander, their shipyards appear to be located in uninhabited star systems throughout their local spiral arm. They've been building this fleet for decades, possibly since their first contact with Coalition forces." Xaxthara felt a chill as the implications settled over her. While the Coalition had been politely dismissing humanity as too primitive for galactic society, humans had been secretly preparing for a war that advanced civilizations couldn't win. They had studied Coalition weaknesses, analyzed devourer capabilities, and built an entire military infrastructure designed around technologies that everyone else had abandoned. "Signal from Admiral Kane," announced Operative Kesh, his tentacles dancing across the communication array. "He's requesting permission to link our tactical computers with their battle network." "Granted," Xaxthara replied immediately. If the humans were willing to share their tactical information, perhaps the Coalition could finally understand how they were achieving the impossible. The moment their computers connected to the human battle network, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The data streams flowing between human ships operated on principles that Coalition scientists would have declared impossible. Instead of the careful, energy-efficient communication protocols used by advanced civilizations, human ships maintained constant high-bandwidth connections that would have drained most vessels' power supplies in minutes. "How are they maintaining such intensive communication networks?" Kala asked, her crystal form dimming with confusion. "They appear to be using brute force power generation," Veltar replied, studying the incoming data with fascination. "Each vessel carries multiple fusion reactors operating at efficiency levels we would consider dangerously unstable. They're generating approximately 10 times the power output of comparable Coalition vessels." Xaxthara studied the human fleet deployment as more ships continued to emerge from hyperspace. Carriers disgorged fighter craft that moved with aggressive precision, their pilots apparently unconcerned about the overwhelming numerical superiority of the approaching devourer fleets. Support vessels took positions that suggested they planned to maintain this engagement for hours or even days, rather than the quick strike and retreat tactics that Coalition forces had been forced to adopt. "Commander," called out Navigator Plix from his station, "the lead devourer fleet is entering weapons range. They're maintaining their standard energy absorption formation." On the tactical display, the approaching enemy force looked like a swarm of living darkness spreading across space. 120,000 vessels moved with predatory coordination, their collective intelligence confident that they faced just another advanced civilization that relied on energy weapons and sophisticated defensive systems. "Admiral Kane," Xaxthara broadcast, "enemy fleet has achieved weapons range. They're deploying in standard absorption formation. Our tactical computers calculate approximately 4,000 to 1 odds against your fleet." The response came immediately, carrying what sounded like amusement. "Understood, Commander. We've faced worse odds during training exercises. Human fleet, this is Admiral Kane. Today we proved that sometimes the galaxy needs someone stubborn enough to ignore impossible odds. All vessels, weapons free. Show them why Earth builds warships instead of exploration vessels." What followed challenged every assumption the Coalition had made about modern space warfare. The human fleet didn't retreat to a safe distance, and engage with long-range energy weapons. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the Devourer formation with velocities that stressed even their reinforced hulls. It was a frontal assault using tactics that most civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. The first exchange of fire painted space with brief flares of kinetic weapon discharges, and the longer, more spectacular detonations of destroyed Devourer vessels. Where coalition energy weapons had fed the enemy and made them stronger, human kinetic weapons simply punched through exotic matter hulls and released the stored energy all at once. Each impact created an explosion visible from light years away as enemy vessels ceased to exist at the molecular level. Direct hit ratios approaching 90%, Kala reported, her voice filled with disbelief. How are they achieving such accuracy with unguided projectiles? They appear to be using a combination of computer targeting and human intuition, Veltar explained, studying the tactical data streaming through their shared network. Their weapons officers are making real-time adjustments based on pattern recognition rather than pure mathematical calculation. It's actually more effective than our automated systems. ZYX-Thara watched in fascination as human fighter craft weaved through Devourer formations with an aggressiveness that bordered on insanity. Where coalition pilots relied on computer-assisted navigation and automated defensive systems, human pilots seemed to trust their own reflexes and intuition. They flew their craft like extensions of their own bodies, making split-second decisions that no computer could anticipate. Enemy casualties are mounting rapidly, reported Operative Kesh. The Devourer fleet is attempting to implement defensive maneuvers, but their vessels aren't designed for this type of engagement. That was becoming increasingly obvious as the battle progressed. The Devourers had evolved to fight energy-based civilizations that engaged at long range with sophisticated weapon systems. They had no effective response to an enemy that simply flew directly at them and hit them with kinetic weapons moving at significant fractions of light speed. Multiple enemy formations breaking apart, Kala announced. They're attempting to retreat, but human pursuit craft are maintaining contact. ZYX-Thara studied the tactical display as human destroyers and frigates pursued fleeing Devourer vessels with relentless determination. Where coalition forces would have been content to drive off the enemy, humans seemed committed to complete annihilation of any hostile force that entered this star system. Commander, Veltar called out from his science station, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the remaining Devourer fleets. They appear to be charging some kind of superweapon. The tactical display updated to show the three approaching reinforcement fleets combining into a single massive formation. At the center of the group, energy readings spiked to levels that made coalition computers issue warnings about imminent stellar collapse. Whatever the Devourers were preparing, it was powerful enough to threaten the star system itself. Admiral Kane, ZYX-Thara broadcast urgently. Our sensors detect extreme energy buildup in the enemy reserve forces. They appear to be preparing a weapon of unprecedented power. Confirmed, came Kane's immediate reply. We're tracking the same energy signature. It appears they're attempting to convert the local star into a weapon by disrupting its nuclear fusion processes. If successful, the resulting explosion will sterilize everything within 50 light-years. The magnitude of the threat settled over the bridge like a cold blanket. The Devourers weren't just trying to defeat the human fleet. They were preparing to sacrifice an entire star system to eliminate what they apparently considered an existential threat to their expansion across the galaxy. All coalition vessels, Kane continued, begin immediate evacuation to minimum safe distance. Human fleet will maintain position and attempt to prevent enemy superweapon deployment. Admiral, ZYX-Thara protested, a stellar disruption weapon cannot be stopped by conventional military action. Even your kinetic weapons cannot reach the enemy formation before they complete their attack sequence. You're thinking like a civilized being, Commander, Kane replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was smiling. Sometimes the only way to stop a superweapon is with an even bigger superweapon. Human vessels, prepare for Operation Broken Arrow. All personnel not essential to weapons operation should evacuate to survival pods immediately. ZYX-Thara felt her blood turn cold as she recognized the implications. Operation Broken Arrow was a term from human military history that indicated the use of weapons so destructive that they threatened the forces deploying them. Whatever the humans were planning, it was dangerous enough that they were evacuating their own crews. "What are you planning?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Something that your people would probably consider too insane to attempt," Kane replied. "We're going to ram their superweapon with a dreadnought carrying a controlled black hole generator. If we can detonate it at the center of their formation, the gravitational disruption should prevent them from achieving stellar ignition." The casual way he described what amounted to a suicide mission made Zoyaxthara's secondary arms tremble. Human military doctrine apparently included tactics that other civilizations would never consider because the risks were too extreme. They were prepared to sacrifice an entire dreadnought and its crew to prevent an attack that would sterilize multiple star systems. "Admiral," she said carefully, "such a maneuver would result in the complete loss of the attacking vessel and all hands aboard." "Negative, Commander," Kane replied, and now she could definitely hear the smile in his voice. "We didn't build these ships just to look intimidating. Every human dreadnought carries experimental teleportation systems for emergency crew evacuation. The ship will be lost, but the crew will survive to tell their grandchildren about the day they had but to star." As if to emphasize his point, one of the massive human dreadnoughts began accelerating toward the enemy formation at velocities that would have torn apart any coalition vessel. Its escort ships peeled away as the great warship built up speed, heading directly toward the center of the Devourer's superweapon array. "All vessels," Admiral Kane broadcast, "this is what we came here to do. Show the galaxy that sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem is someone crazy enough to try the impossible solution." Zoyaxthara watched in amazement as the human dreadnought reached speeds that stressed the very fabric of space-time, heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether this star system survived the next hour. Around her, the Coalition Bridge crew stared at displays showing tactical maneuvers that defied every principle of rational military doctrine. For the first time since the Devourer invasion began, she allowed herself to hope that the galaxy might actually have a chance of survival. Captain Maria Vasquez stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Prometheus as it accelerated toward the center of the Devourer superweapon formation. Around her, the evacuation alarms had fallen silent as the last of the non-essential crew transported to rescue vessels. Only the bridge crew remained, along with the engineering teams needed to maintain the ship's systems during what would probably be the most aggressive maneuver in human military history. "Time to intercept?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm that had made her legendary among human fleet commanders. 17 minutes at current acceleration," replied Navigation Officer Zhang Wei, his hands steady on controls that were pushing the massive ship beyond its design specifications. "The black hole generator is charging normally. We should reach critical mass approximately 30 seconds before impact." Maria studied the tactical displays showing the Devourer formation ahead of them. The enemy had arranged their vessels in a perfect sphere around what appeared to be an artificial construct the size of a small moon. Energy readings from the center of their formation suggested they were indeed attempting to destabilize the local star's fusion processes, turning it into a weapon capable of sterilizing everything within dozens of light years. "Engineering, status on the singularity containment," she called to the crew deep in the ship's bowels. "Containment field holding steady," came the reply from Chief Engineer Rodriguez. "The black hole is currently about the size of a proton and growing according to schedule. When we drop containment at the center of their formation, it should expand to roughly planetary mass in about 3 seconds." Maria nodded, considering the physics of what they were attempting. A controlled black hole detonation at the center of the enemy formation would create gravitational disruptions powerful enough to tear apart the exotic matter that comprised Devourer vessels. It would also completely destroy the Prometheus and everyone still aboard her, but that was a price the crew had accepted when they volunteered for this mission. "Captain," called out Communications Officer Park, "Admiral Kane is requesting final status report." "Signal the Admiral," Maria replied. "Tell him Operation Broken Arrow is proceeding on schedule. Estimated time to detonation is 16 minutes and counting. All crew evacuation complete except for essential personnel who choose to remain aboard." She didn't mention that her entire bridge crew had volunteered to stay with the ship, unwilling to leave their captain to face the final moments alone. It was a gesture that would have been dismissed as primitive emotional thinking by advanced civilizations, but it represented something that humanity had never lost despite their technological advancement: absolute loyalty to each other in the face of impossible odds. "Captain," Zhang reported, "we're receiving multiple communication attempts from the Devourer fleet. They appear to be trying to establish contact." Maria considered this development with interest. The Devourers had never attempted communication with coalition forces, treating them as nothing more than sources of energy to be consumed. If they were trying to talk now, it suggested they recognized humanity as a genuine threat to their expansion across the galaxy. "Put them through," she decided. "Let's hear what they have to say." The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything in human experience, a harmony of tones that suggested multiple intelligences speaking as one entity. When it spoke, the words carried implications that went beyond simple language, conveying concepts that touched the edge of human understanding. "Human vessels," the voice said, its tone carrying what might have been respect mixed with genuine confusion. "We have observed your actions against our expansion forces. Your weapons operate on principles we do not comprehend. Your tactics violate every law of efficient warfare. Yet you achieve victory where more advanced civilizations fail completely." Maria exchanged glances with her bridge crew before responding. "Devourer vessels, this is Captain Maria Vasquez of the human dreadnought Prometheus. We are currently on a collision course with your superweapon platform. You have approximately 15 minutes to cease your attack on this star system and withdraw all forces beyond the outer planets." "We cannot comply," came the immediate reply. "Humanity represents an existential threat to our expansion across this galaxy. Your weapons can destroy us, your tactics can defeat us, and your apparent disregard for rational military doctrine makes you impossible to predict. You must be eliminated before you spread your influence to other species." "Then, we have a problem," Maria said calmly, watching as the countdown timer showed 14 minutes to impact. "Because humanity doesn't negotiate with entities that threaten civilian populations. You attacked innocent people, and now you get to learn why our species mastered warfare before we ever left our home planet." The Devourer response carried undertones of what might have been desperation. "You do not understand what you are interfering with. Our kind has consumed entire galaxies, absorbed the energy of billions of civilizations. We have faced every possible form of resistance and emerged victorious. What makes you believe you can succeed where others have failed?" Maria smiled grimly as she considered her answer. Around her, the bridge crew continued their preparations for the final phase of their mission, each one focused on their duties despite the knowledge that they had less than 15 minutes to live. "Simple," she replied. "Everyone else tried to fight you with energy weapons and sophisticated technology. We just decided to hit you really hard with big chunks of metal moving really fast. Sometimes the old ways work best." As if to emphasize her point, the tactical displays showed human fleet elements continuing their systematic destruction of the remaining Devourer vessels throughout the star system. Kinetic weapons punched through exotic matter hulls with mechanical precision, each impact resulting in complete enemy annihilation. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable against advanced civilizations were being eliminated by weapons that most species considered obsolete. "Your approach to warfare is inefficient," the Devourer voice continued, though there was something in its tone that suggested uncertainty. "You waste enormous amounts of energy on kinetic acceleration when the same results could be achieved more elegantly with directed energy systems." "Efficiency isn't everything," Maria replied, checking the countdown timer again. 12 minutes to impact. "Sometimes you need something that just works, regardless of how elegant it looks. Our kinetic weapons might be inefficient, but they're also unstoppable by anything you've developed." She opened a channel to the human fleet. "All vessels, this is Prometheus. We are approaching final phase of Operation Broken Arrow. Continue standard engagement protocols. Do not attempt rescue operations after detonation. The gravitational effects will be too severe for safe approach." The acknowledgments came back immediately from dozens of human ships throughout the system, each captain understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered as long as humanity existed. The crew of the Prometheus was about to sacrifice themselves to save not just this star system, but potentially every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Captain," Zhang reported, "we're encountering gravitational interference from the enemy superweapon. They're attempting to alter our trajectory using directed gravity wells." Maria studied the navigation displays as exotic gravitational forces tried to pull the Prometheus off course. The Devourers were apparently trying to prevent the collision while continuing their attack on the local star, hoping to complete their superweapon deployment before the human ship could reach them. "Engineering," she called. "Can we compensate for the gravitational interference?" "Negative, Captain," came Rodriguez's reply. "We're already at maximum acceleration. If we push the engines any harder, we'll risk structural failure before reaching the target." Maria considered their options as the countdown timer showed 10 minutes remaining. The Prometheus was the key to stopping the stellar disruption weapon, but if they couldn't reach the center of the enemy formation, the entire operation would fail. The star would be turned into a weapon, and dozens of inhabited systems would be sterilized. "Zhang," she said, making a decision that would have horrified any rational military commander. "Shut down the inertial dampers and redirect all power to the main engines. We're going to reach that target even if it kills us before we get there." The navigation officer's hands paused over his controls as he processed the order. Without inertial dampers, the acceleration forces would be lethal to any crew still aboard the ship. They would all die in the next few minutes, but they would die knowing that their sacrifice had prevented something much worse. "Zhang," Maria said gently, "we knew what we signed up for when we volunteered for this mission. The only question is whether we die here or let billions of innocent people die instead." Her navigation officer nodded and began implementing the order. Around the bridge, the other crew members continued their duties with the calm determination that had made humanity's military feared throughout the galaxy. They were about to prove that sometimes the most advanced technology couldn't substitute for simple courage and an absolute refusal to give up. The acceleration that followed would have impressed the designers of human military vessels. The Prometheus shot forward like a bullet, its engines producing thrust levels that warped space-time around the ship. The gravitational interference from the Devourer's superweapon became irrelevant as raw kinetic force overcame exotic matter manipulation. "Time to impact," Maria asked, though she could barely speak as the acceleration forces pressed her into her command chair. "For minutes," Zhang managed, his voice strained but determined. "Black hole generator reaching critical mass in 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Maria opened a final communication to the human fleet. "This is Captain Vasquez aboard the Prometheus. Operation Broken Arrow proceeding as planned. Tell Earth Command that we proved something important today. Sometimes the best technology is the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect innocent people." She closed the channel and watched as the Devourer formation grew larger on the tactical displays. In a few minutes, the controlled black hole in their ship's belly would be released at the center of the enemy's superweapon, creating gravitational chaos that would tear apart every exotic matter construct within light years. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity didn't just build better weapons, they built people willing to use those weapons in ways that more civilized species would never consider. Win or lose, the Prometheus and her crew were about to prove that sometimes the most primitive approach was also the most effective. As the countdown timer reached final seconds, Maria smiled and whispered a prayer that her sacrifice would give the galaxy time to learn from humanity's example. The stars needed guardians who understood that some fights were worth dying for, and Earth had just proven that they were willing to provide exactly that kind of protection. The black hole detonated at the exact center of the Devourer formation, and the resulting gravitational explosion painted the cosmos with light that would be visible for 1,000 years. When it faded, the superweapon was gone, the star was safe, and the galaxy had new protectors who would never be dismissed as primitive again. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and coalition vessels transmitted the tactical data back to their civilizations, one fact became clear to every advanced species in the galaxy. Sometimes salvation came from the most unlikely sources, and the beings everyone had dismissed as too primitive to matter had just saved them all.